when 62-year-old cattle magnate Jasper Vaughn rode through his ranch gates after months on the winter trail. The last thing he expected was a desperate child clutching a starving mule. The boy, Tommy Hartwell, couldn't have been more than 10, his clothes threadbare, his eyes hollow with grief and determination. The ranch, once a lonely place of hard work and solitude, was now filled with laughter, warmth, and the everyday rhythms of a family. Jasper found himself looking forward to the small moments: breakfast in the kitchen with Rosie and Tommy, their quiet conversations, and the shared satisfaction of hard work. Jasper had never expected to find himself in this position, and yet, the more time he spent with Rosie, the more he realized how much she meant to him. The discovery of Rosie's inheritance had turned their world upside down. With help from trusted allies, they prepared for the storm that was inevitably coming. They weren't alone, not anymore, and this time, Jasper wasn't the lone man facing down adversity. The quiet affection he felt for her had evolved into something deeper. She was no longer just a girl he had married out of necessity. She had become his partner in every sense of the word. His feelings for her went beyond simple protection. He admired her intelligence, her strength, and the way she had changed the entire dynamic of his life. The rocking V Ranch became a symbol of prosperity and hope for the area. And through it all, Jasper remained by their side, a man who had once been alone, but had now found a family to call his own. Together, they had built something that would last far beyond their lifetimes, something far more valuable than silver or land. They had built a family, a community, and a future. And as Jasper sat on the porch, looking out over the land that had once been his solitary domain, he knew that no matter what challenges they might face in the future, they would face them together. Because, in the end, family was all that mattered. His growing affection for her terrified him. He had always seen himself as a solitary man, content with his work and his solitude. But now, with Rosie by his side, Jasper realized that his heart had begun to open again. She had filled the space he hadn't even known was empty. He had his family, and they would face whatever came together. The law, the one thing they had clung to, was finally on their side. She had her inheritance now, but more importantly, she had the power to shape her own destiny. With Jasper's support, she envisioned a future where children from the valley could have an education, just like her parents had wanted. The Hartwell Academy, a school for the children of the valley, would become a reality. It was a fitting tribute to the legacy of her parents, who had believed in the power of education and community. The fraudsters were arrested, and their claims were dismissed. The inheritance was secure, but the emotional cost was high. The battle had taken its toll on everyone, and as Jasper looked around the ranch, at his family, his real family, he realized that everything had changed. The ranch was no longer just a place to work and sleep. It was home, filled with love, laughter, and the possibility of a future that wasn't defined by hardship and loss. Rosie, despite her initial fears, proved herself to be as determined as any of them. She stepped forward with a quiet strength that only grew in the face of danger. Tommy, though still a boy, had matured rapidly. He stood by his sister's side, fiercely protective of her and willing to fight for her future. The news that Rosie had inherited valuable mining rights from her late father's side of the family brought attention from every corner. The enemies they faced were clever, ruthless, and prepared to use both legal and illegal means to force them into submission. But what these men didn't understand was the power of family, the bond that had formed between Jasper, Rosie, and Tommy. No amount of money, no number of threats could break that bond. The legal battles, the violence, the intimidation, it all built up to a final confrontation where Jasper had to make choices that would define the future of his family. Some of that attention was welcome. Jasper now had the means to secure the future for himself and the children he'd come to care for, but much of it was unwanted. People, men, dangerous men, began to take notice. The fraudulent debt collectors, led by the manipulative Bradford, saw Rosie's inheritance as a way to make money, and they had no qualms about using threats, deception, and intimidation to claim it. Jasper, though accustomed to handling threats in his years of building his ranch, had never faced something like this. The fraudsters weren't interested in negotiating. They wanted to take everything Rosie had inherited, and they were willing to use any means to get it. Despite the vast differences in their age and the circumstances that had bound them together, their relationship began to evolve. What had been a simple legal arrangement, born out of necessity, slowly became something more complex. Jasper found himself thinking of her not just as a young woman under his protection, but as an equal, a partner, and yes, even someone who made him feel things he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He had spent so long mourning the loss of his wife, Margaret, that he hadn't truly realized how much he had been missing. Sense of companionship, of shared purpose, of warmth. Rosie was filling that void, though it was a void he wasn't entirely ready to acknowledge. Rosie, despite the tragedy that had brought her to Jasper's door, showed resilience beyond her years. She was more than just a survivor. She was intelligent, capable, and fierce in her love for her brother. Tommy, too, found his place. Under Cal's patient guidance, the boy blossomed. He learned quickly, his natural talent with horses earning him the respect of even the most seasoned ranch hands. For the first time in his life, Tommy knew what it was to be valued and to have a future that wasn't defined by his past. He pleaded for shelter for himself and his 18-year-old sister, Rosie, after their parents perished crossing the plains. Her quiet strength, her intelligence, and her ability to handle the ranch's business side made her indispensable. Jasper had built his fortune from nothing, but Rosie's influence was changing the way he looked at his work. She saw inefficiencies he'd missed. She had a head for figures, and she wasn't afraid to suggest improvements that ultimately saved the ranch money. Her steady hand in running the household, her care for Tommy, and her quiet courage in the face of their uncertain future began to weave her into the fabric of the ranch as much as any of the land. Jasper had painstakingly cultivated. Jasper, having built his fortune from nothing and understanding desperation, decided to offer them a place on his ranch. However, local law required Rosie to be legally bound to a household or face the dreaded poor farm, so a paper marriage seemed the only solution to keep the siblings together. But what began as charity slowly grew into something deeper. The children's story unfolded over time, revealing their parents' tragic death and a journey to survival that led them to Jasper's ranch. Rosie, wise and capable, proved invaluable in managing the household and finances, while Tommy, eager to learn, thrived under the mentorship of Jasper's foreman. The ranch, once a solitary home for Jasper after his wife Margaret's death, slowly filled with life, warmth, and the promise of a family, albeit an unconventional one. Then came the threat of legal claims on Rosie's inheritance, tied to a valuable silver mine. As dangerous men pursued them with fraudulent claims, Jasper was forced to protect his new family at all costs. His marriage to Rosie, initially a mere formality, became a shield against those who sought to exploit her inheritance. Through legal battles, threats, and violence, Jasper and Rosie grew closer, their partnership deepening into genuine affection. The arrival of legal documents revealed Rosie's inheritance in unexpected fortune that brought new dangers. As they fought to preserve their newfound family, Tommy's transformation from a frightened orphan to a confident young man mirrored the ranch's growth. Their life together, once defined by necessity, evolved into something full of love and respect. In the end, despite the threats from outside forces, Jasper found solace in the family they had become, understanding that true wealth was found not in silver, but in the love and loyalty that bound them together. As the days passed at the Rocking V Ranch, Jasper Vaughn and the Hartwell siblings settled into their new lives, an unspoken bond growing among them. The more time Jasper spent with Rosie, the more he saw the woman she was becoming. The paper marriage that had started as a practical solution to a legal dilemma was now beginning to feel like something more. As spring turned to summer, the rhythms of the ranch settled into a comforting routine. But all was not peaceful in their new life. Jasper and Rosie had no choice but to defend what was now theirs to defend: their family, their home, and the life they had built together. The situation grew more dire as the fraudulent claims against Rosie's inheritance escalated. As the situation grew more tense, Jasper realized that he had come to care for Rosie in ways he never imagined. Their final victory came when the fraudulent claims were exposed. As the dust settled, Rosie began to make plans for the future. In the years that followed, Jasper watched as Rosie and Tommy grew into their roles as leaders in the ranching community.